Okay, so 4 out of 5 would be an American-born citizen. Is that what you're saying?
An American-born person, right. Some of them are teenagers, some of them are adults. A lot of them are adults, too.
So
teenagers don't just American teens obviously compete sometimes with adults. Sometimes they compete with immigrants. And the immigrants, of course, are not teenagers. That's the other important thing. We looked at 2007 a lot and focused a lot of our analysis because that's before the recession. Obviously, the last 2 years have been very disastrous, but almost certainly immigration has very little per se to do with the change in the last 2 years. So we concentrate a lot on, say, 94 to 2007 because they're both periods of economic expansion. And we also look a lot at 2000 and 2007 because they're both supposed to be peak years in the economic expansion. But no matter how you sort of slice the data, things look terrible for teens, and the big gainers seem to be the immigrants. And those occupations where teenagers tended to lose the most, immigrants tended to do quite well and pick up a lot of the share of the occupation. And these are things, just as we said, cashier or waiter, waitress, busboy, those kind of food service jobs, and food preparation jobs like a cook or food preparing person at a cafeteria, some daycare and childcare, lifeguard, that sort of thing. Though lifeguard is a heavy teen occupation, it is not an area where there are a lot of immigrants, I should point out. So there are exceptions. But the reason, the statistic you gave out of 1 out of 5 workers in the high teenage occupations are immigrants, and they're mostly, again, adult immigrants. There's not that many teenage immigrants. The reason that's important is because a lot of people will say, well, don't immigrants and teenagers never do the same kind of work? Aren't all the immigrants out on the farm and all the teenagers are in the air-conditioned mall? Well, that may have been true 20, 30 years ago, but only a tiny fraction of immigrants, say, work in agriculture. We think that only 5% of all illegal immigrants actually work in agriculture. It may go up to 6% or 7% when, at the height of the harvest season, but in other words, it's just a small number now. Very few immigrants work in things like agriculture. The vast majority of immigrants are in food service and preparation and hospitality, building, cleaning, and maintenance and construction. Agriculture is a modest fraction of the U.S. economy, and it's a small fraction of immigrant, including illegal immigrant, employment. So these are the places where the teenagers and the immigrants are competing for the jobs in the air-conditioned mall, or sometimes construction, janitors, that sort of thing.
Well, Stephen, I was way off on that because I just assumed that most of the immigrants were doing the agriculture. So is it the blacks or the whites, or do you know a percentage of who's doing the other? You got 6% of immigrants doing the agriculture work, average. Who's the rest of the people doing that agriculture work?
Don't confuse two percentages. I'm glad you asked that, Chuck. So maybe there's some confusion. No, what I'm saying is that if you take all the immigrants, all 23 million immigrants working in the United States, maybe 500,000 of those folks are employed in agriculture. Now, in agriculture, at the height of the season, 1 million, 1.5 million people work in agriculture. So if there's 500,000 immigrants there, they make up a very large percentage of all the workers in agriculture. But of all immigrant workers, only a small fraction are in agriculture because agriculture itself is just about 1% of the U.S. workforce. That's why most immigrants don't work in agriculture, because it's only 1% of the U.S. workforce. They couldn't all fit there anyway. You see the difference?
I do now. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Now, let me lump these two together here, kind of. Comparisons across states 2007 show that in 10 states where immigrants are the largest share of workers, just 45% of the U.S.-born teens were in the summer labor force, compared to 58% in the 10 states where immigrants are the smallest share of workers. Now then, in this report, you also got into the states with a high immigration and low teen labor force participation. And can you tell the listener what those states are?
Well, they're the states that they might guess, and California is obviously one of the first among them, but they're the other states that you might guess. They would be states like Arizona and New York State and Florida. In these states, these might also include states like New Jersey and Nevada. In those states, generally, teens have relatively low employment, and they also, at the same time, very heavy immigrant states.
The one, Stephen, that jumps out at me, and we're almost on a break here, but North Carolina, what is the attraction on North Carolina for immigrants?
Well, in the 80s and into the 90s, and even into this decade, North North Carolina has been a very rapid growth state for employment, partly because of agriculture, partly because, partly because of manufacturing, both light and heavy manufacturing. In addition to that, as financial services was a big growth, there was a lot of employment growth in North Carolina over the last few decades. Also construction as the population increased. So there was a lot of, and relatively diverse employment growth in construction, in manufacturing. Now that's mostly stopped at this point.
In fact, going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into more of this about construction. I'm sure that has a lot to do with Nevada, but then all those casinos. Anyway, we'll find out. Steve Camarota, Director of Research at the Center for Immigration Studies, talking about their study, immigration versus teen employment. We'll be right back.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a